A Snake in the Grass, A Wolf at the Door by Black K. Cat. Chapter 10. The shower is running when Orochimaru slips back into the house and there's a pot of miso soup heating on the stove while the rice steams. The clone has a set of Orochimaru's off-duty clothes laid out already, and he changes into them gratefully, glad to escape the smell of the river he spent so much time in on his way to Ame. He's just dumping the uniform into a rag bin when Sakamoto wanders down the hall, his hair still dripping and a towel draped across his shoulders. With a sigh that's 3 parts aggravation and 1 part amusement, Orochimaru abandons his task and crosses to Sakamoto's side, stealing the towel and tossing it over his head. "You're going to make yourself sick," he informs him, "and I won't be the one to care for you." Sakamoto laughs, leaning in to kiss Orochimaru quickly and catches his wrists in gentle hands as he starts to rub the older man's hair dry. "Lies!" he canters. "You'd make a great nursemaid, lovely." "Not for you." Orochimaru raises a brow at him, trying not to let any more amusement show. "You whine terribly when you have a cold, Sakamoto. I would leave you to Tsunade's tender mercies without regret." Another laugh, softer this time, and Sakamoto steps forward, gently tipping Orochimaru's chin up and sliding their mouths together in a slow, exploratory kiss. "Really?" he murmurs as he leans back. "Do you doubt me?" Orochimaru counters. Solemnity slides over Sakamoto's face, though thankfully there's nothing grim about it. He pulls back a little, hands settling on Orochimaru's hips, and just looks at him for a long moment. Then he smiles, small and warm, and pulls Orochimaru toward him. "Never!" he murmurs against Orochimaru's hair. "Never you, Orochimaru. I would doubt everything else in the world before I doubt you." There's a faint ache in Orochimaru, somewhere he can't quite pinpoint. He rests his head against Sakamoto's shoulder, carefully looping his arms around the man's back, and doesn't quite dare to close his eyes. Just for a moment he doesn't think of loss, of what could have been, of what might have happened if Sakamoto had given in to grief. What might have happened if Sakamoto had never saved him on that long ago mission. Just this once, there are no possibilities in Orochimaru's head, no speculations, no thoughts, just warmth, soul deep and skin warm, Sakamoto's large hand sliding up and down his spine in gentle strokes. Orochimaru is a creature of death and blood and cold, sharp intellect like the edge of a blade. He has never been otherwise, never wanted to be otherwise, and Sakamoto has never asked him to change those parts of himself. There have been moments, seconds, where Sakamoto simply looked at him and smiled, and Orochimaru had looked back and seen that maybe, just maybe, there was more to him than that. Little pieces of something greater fitting in against his jagged edges and smoothing them out. Not quite making him whole, but something. Something good, which wouldn't exist without this man. Fingers sweep his hair back from his face, smoothing it over his shoulders, and Orochimaru glances up to find Sakamoto smiling at him. His silver hair is still dripping a little, and his eyes are soft. Orochimaru holds his gaze, tilting his chin into that careful touch, and finally says, "I'm not made of glass, Sakamoto. You will never manage to hurt me." Because he can see the worry in Sakamoto as clear as day. The ragged tear of everything is breaking. What if this does too? It itches at him like an open wound that Sakamoto should feel that way because Orochimaru will never leave. He's strong enough to stand and keep fighting, no matter what, regardless of anything. And the feeling of being needed by this man is enough to push him onward through whatever comes. There's a pause, a hesitation, and then Sakamoto chuckles softly. His touch firms, sliding back so he can twist his fingers into Orochimaru's hair and tip his head back. "I suppose it's just the association," he says with some humor and even more warmth. "Precious things are usually delicate, too. You're simply an exception to the rule, lovely." Never in his life has anyone called Orochimaru precious. He can't even remember his parents speaking the word, and from anyone other than Sakamoto, he thinks he'd hate it. But there's a kernel of something rooted in his chest, small and white hot, and in its wake he can only shake his head bemusedly. "You shouldn't be able to say such things with a straight face, mutt," he complains, though his heart isn't in it. That earns a full-blown laugh, bright and happy, and Sakamoto leans in to drop a kiss on the purple clan markings around Orochimaru's eyes. "What can I say?" he asks, and though it isn't quite with his usual cheer, he's still 1,000 miles from the broken man Orochimaru returned to. "You inspire me, lovely." A pause, and then he dips down with clear intent. Orochimaru tips his head to meet him, and the kiss isn't quite as gentle as before. but still soft. A thank you, almost. Touched with gratitude and fondness and friendship, bound by something Orochimaru is very sure he could call love. But he has no skill with such things, and his declaration in the garden is the closest he's ever come to speaking those words. He thinks Sakamoto understands regardless. Orochimaru is not a gentleman, not kind. He's a weapon brought to bear against the world with too many weapons in it already, and the only way he survived is being stronger, better, harsher than all the rest. He cuts deeper wounds mortally, and he's never learned how to be different. Sakamoto is a sheath. Sakamoto doesn't dull him, but contains him, holds him back without changing who he is, gives him a touch of restraint that makes him acceptable, wanted. Like this, with Sakamoto beside him, Orochimaru can be both human and weapon, and that's all he's ever wanted or needed to be. From the front of the house comes the sound of the door clicking open, then footsteps in the hall. There's a pause, a little worried and weary, and then Kakashi calls quietly, "Tosan? Oro?" Sakamoto's breath catches in his throat, and he lifts his head, eyes widening as they snap to meet Orochimaru's. Orochimaru just smiles a little in answer, stepping back and tips his head in a silent order. The smile that blooms across Sakamoto's face is more brilliant than any Orochimaru has seen before, shining with gratitude and hope and bone-deep relief, and he laughs loud and free. With a sound that's almost like a whoop, he ducks forward to grab Orochimaru around the waist and lifts him right off the ground, rolling him into his pen. Orochimaru squawks in surprise, snatching at Sakamoto's shoulder. The arms around his waist, tight and clutching him close, and Sakamoto whispers in desperate, "Thank you," against his lips, half an instant before he calls back, "Just a second, cub," and then tosses Orochimaru right over his shoulder like a sack of rice before he heads down the hall with jaunty steps. "Sakamoto!" Orochimaru protests with a sharp hiss, banging an ineffectual fist against the man's back. "Sakamoto, put me down, or I will show you just what Tsunade taught me about pressure points, you oversized oaf." "Oh, come on, lovely!" Sakamoto laughs, shifting an arm around the backs of Orochimaru's knees so he can kick the idiot in the gut. "What's the harm in it? Indulge me!" He ducks to get through the kitchen doorway, then straightens again and lets Orochimaru slide to the ground, though he doesn't move his hands from the other man's waist. "You have no concept of dignity," Orochimaru hisses, glaring at Sakamoto, though he doesn't try to step away either. "And if I indulge you, even for a second, but it will go straight to your head." "Well, we can't have that," Sakamoto agrees, smiling and leans in to kiss Orochimaru swiftly. There's a pause, and then Kakashi sighs, sounding entirely long-suffering as he asks, "Should I come back later?" Sakamoto's head snaps up, and his smile softens, gaining an almost tentative edge. "Kakashi," he says, brushing his fingers over Orochimaru's cheek one last time before he steps towards his son. At the edge of the hallway, he pauses, clearly uncertain of his welcome, and looks at Kakashi with something like desperation in his eyes. "You're back!" Kakashi takes a deep breath and nods, looking up and meeting Sakamoto's eyes. "Sorry, I didn't tell you when I left," he says, and even with the mask, his expression of determination is clear. He steps forward, equally tentative, and offers simply, "I'm glad you made it home safe, Tosan." Sakamoto's smile deepens, warm. He reaches out as he drops to his knees, wraps an arm around Kakashi's shoulders, and hugs him gently. "Me too," he whispers. "Thanks, cub." Kakashi makes a sound that is somewhere between deeply relieved and grumpy, and then asks pointedly, "Does this mean I should start calling Oro Kasan?" Sakamoto almost falls over from laughing too hard, and Orochimaru rolls his eyes, stepping past the idiot to see that Kakashi isn't alone in the hall. There's a boy his age hovering in the background, watching with wide and slightly weary black eyes. He can't be anything other than an Uchiha, but the clan jealously guards its children. To have him here, just after dark, without any apparent hurry to head back to his home, makes Orochimaru curious. He's also dripping on the floor. "Hello," he greets, moving closer. "I'm Orochimaru. Please don't mind the fool." That gets him a hesitant smile, one that manages to light up the boy's face. He ducks into a quick bow and answers, "I'm Uchiha Obito. It's nice to meet you, Orochimaru. Your Kiyohime is really, really pretty." Orochimaru decides that this boy is entirely acceptable as Kakashi's friend. Thank you, he responds, offering a faint smile in return. Kiyohime would thank you for the compliment as well. Why don't you come in and let me find you a towel? Obito offered to help me find some books for Minato. Kakashi volunteers, extracting himself from his father's grasp. But he fell in the river, so he said he could borrow some of my clothes first. Kind of, Yuka. Sakamo pats him on the shoulder, ignoring the half-hearted glare Kakashi gives him with a nickname, and turns a welcoming smile on Obito as he stands. Still, it's getting late. I think Namikaze will survive the night without his books as long as you bring them first thing in the morning. Because he's watching. Orochimaru sees the faint resignation that slips through Obito's eyes, the faint flicker of clear loneliness that settles over his expression for half an instant before he banishes it with a bright smile. Ah, he thinks, and has to look away to hide his amusement. Just like his father, Kakashi has started taking in strays. Would you like to stay the night, Obito? He asks deliberately offhand. It's a long walk back to the Uchiha section at this time of night, and I'm sure Kakashi won't object to sharing a room. Obito looks up at him with wide eyes, then glances over at where Kakashi is determinedly looking in the other direction. I don't care, Kakashi says. Whatever. But there's an extra futon if you want it. Sakamo, Orochimaru can see, is trying very hard not to start laughing again. Thanks, Obito says, something like awe in his voice, and then laughs. He bounces over to Kakashi's side and almost throws himself on the other boy's shoulders. I've never had a sleepover before. This'll be fun. Thank you, Kakashi. Orochimaru, sorry. Just Sakamo, Sakamo says dismissively, waving that away. He ruffles Kakashi's hair, earning an indignant huff, and then pets Obito's shoulder as he passes. Why don't you boys go find some dry clothes? Dinner will be ready in a few minutes. This way, Kakashi urges, grabbing Obito's wrist and tugging him down the hall. Sakamo watches them go, expression light and a smile on his lips. When Orochimaru gives him a sideways look, he just shakes his head fondly and murmurs, I don't think he's ever gone out of his way to make a friend before. This is true, Orochimaru concedes. Dai's son decided to befriend Kakashi on his own, and Shizune is more a friend because Tsunade and Orochimaru spend so much time together, and the two children have been thrown together by circumstance. For Kakashi to actually bring someone home is entirely new. Do you know the boy? Is all he asks, however, because the curiosity of an Uchiha on his own is enough to catch his attention. I think he's Minami's kid, Sakamo answers thoughtfully. Never heard her mention a father, though, and she died 2 years ago. Do you think he's been living alone since then? Orochimaru rescues the miso and take the rice off the heat. I can't imagine that the Uchiha approve of mixing bloodlines, he points out. If his father is from outside their clan, it would explain his isolation. Somehow, I don't think Kakashi is going to let him stay that way. Sakamo sounds amused. And Obito doesn't seem like the type to allow himself to be forgotten. Maybe we could just let you take in another stray. Orochimaru finishes for him, raising a pointed brow. Well, he certainly fits your type. Dark hair, no family, lonely. Strong arms curl around his waist, and Sakamo drops his chin onto his shoulder, tilting his head to press his cheek against Orochimaru's hair. Are you admitting you were lonely then? A week ago, Orochimaru would have kicked him for even implying it. Now, with a memory of Sakamo's slumped, defeated form far too clear in his mind, Orochimaru sighs. He doesn't look up from his hands as he stirs cubes of tofu and eggplant into the soup, but says as carelessly as he's able, not so much lonely as alone, desperately. The breath catches in Sakamo's chest, and he shifts Orochimaru's hair aside to lay a careful kiss on the back of his neck. He doesn't address the confession directly because they both know what it cost Orochimaru in pride, but he murmurs something against Orochimaru's skin that just might be, me too. Knowing that is enough to ease some of the tension from Orochimaru's shoulders, and he breathes out. Sakamo kisses the curve of his shoulder where it's bared by his yukata, and then says quietly, there will still be a war. It's a warning and an apology and a plea all wrapped up together, and Orochimaru shakes his head, turning in Sagamo's arms to face him fully. He isn't as grim as he was before, because the desolation has eased into mere weariness, but he's more serious than Orochimaru has seen him in a very long time. We always knew that, Orochimaru counters. War doesn't start from one incident, Sakamo. No single man can spark one. It's an excuse, and I regret that you must serve as it this time. But we would have come to this point eventually. Soon as economics are poor, and Iwo wants more territory. Konoha has the bad luck to be caught between them with grudges from the last war on either side. That's all this is. That gets him a smile, small but heartfelt. So I see. But even if I'm not to blame, it will still be war. We're both going to be called to the front. We're both going to be in danger. Every shinobi in Konoha will be. Not the Genin, Orochimaru reminds him. We may have to move quickly to secure Akatsuki's position in Ame, but it can be done. After that, we'll have one less border to guard, and that makes things feasible. They're going to ask you to face Hanzo again. The worry is clear in Sakamo's eyes. You and Jiraiya and Tsunade? The Hokage won't send anyone else against him. And that's only the first battle. Once this war starts, we'll be the first they turn to. Then we'll have to be certain that we end things quickly. Orochimaru leans forward, dropping his head against Sakamo's chest. Don't borrow trouble, Mutt, he says, faintly aggravated. There will be fighting, and death, and blood. But you won't die, and neither will I, and neither will Kakashi. Between the White Fang, the Densetsu no Sanin, and the Yellow Flash, Konoha is strong. We have superior shinobi, and Sarutobi-sensei has always been stubborn. As a goat! Sakamo agrees with the jungle. Alright, I'll save the worry for another day. Is that all we're having for dinner then, lovely? Orochimaru rolls his eyes. If you wanted something fancier, you should have suggested takeout, he says tartly. Go call the boys. I'll set the table. Sakamo showily kisses his cheek, pinches his butt, and deftly dodges the furious kick Orochimaru directs at him. He's laughing when he ducks into the hallway, one of Orochimaru's senbon thudding into the wall where his head was moments ago. And Orochimaru slares at him, just making him laugh harder. You mange-ridden mott! Orochimaru hisses, I will gut you! I adore you, lovely! He calls back, voice full of mirth and mischief in equal measure, and then, are you decent, boys? Should I get at the chastity belts and marriage licenses? There's an offended squawk from Kakashi, a mortified splutter from Obito, and a bright giggle from Sakamo. Orochimaru sighs aggrievedly and rubs a hand over his brow, belatedly realizing just what it is he seems to have so willingly volunteered for. Still, he's smiling faintly when he moves to lay out places at the table, because for all the disasters of the past few days, for all the war that's looming, this feels rather like the perfect culmination of home. He glances back towards the hallway, catching a glimpse of Sakamo toppling to the ground with Kakashi and Obito both on top of him, and shakes his head remusedly before he turns away. Half a moment later, there's a thunder of footsteps as Sakamo races into the kitchen, both boys on his heels as he laughs. He lunges, catching Orochimaru around the waist before he can sidestep and throws him over his shoulder again with a cry of victory before he bolts for the garden. Kakashi is shouting, Obito giggling so hard he can barely run, and Orochimaru hisses in indignation and slaps Sakamo around the head, but doesn't go for the kunai up his sleeve, which he supposes is the same as allowing it to happen. Orochimaru knows he shouldn't indulge the cheerful fool, but he lets Sakamo drag him away with one big calloused hand tangled in his, laughter warm in his ears, and doesn't speak one word of protest because somehow he knows. They've managed to save each other in the end. End of A Snake in the Grass, A Wolf at the Door by Black K Cat. If you enjoyed this recording or the content, feel free to leave a comment below or a review of the original story from the link in the descriptions. Also, feel free to subscribe to my channel for new chapters and stories published every single day. Thank you for listening.